When we suspended, we were at first reading of bills. I presume that we are now. Yes, yes. Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statements. Appointment of select committees. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As we'd given notice in a previous sitting, our intention to call for 2 select committees. Today, we wish to proceed with one of them, and it is our hope that the government would concur. Madam Speaker, we believe that there is a small window of opportunity for us to address several critical matters that affect our country. Madam Speaker, we have said on this side, and some members on the other side have concurred, that we face several crises simultaneously. We believe, Madam Speaker, that one of the crucial issues that we face is that of illegal immigration and our failure as a country to comprehensively address the issue of migration in a constructive manner. Madam Speaker, we believe that failure to seize this moment may result in deeper consequences that can further damage the quality of life throughout our country. One key component of our National Development Plan, Madam Speaker, must be to put in place a comprehensive immigration and, of course, migration policy on multiple fronts. The Bahamas is at a crossroad. This Parliament has a chance to rise to the occasion and, in a bipartisan way, chart a course that comprehensively addresses the complex and deeply troubling problem of illegal immigration and irregular migration. We must not end this debate without arriving at a shared approach to tackling a familiar challenge that ordinary approaches have failed to alter. It cannot be business as usual. We must send a clear message, Madam Speaker, to the public that our approach from this day forward will be fundamentally different, and it would be sustained and results-driven. And our work will be transparent, and the policies we pursue will be evidence-based. The decisions made by this Parliament can directly have a bearing on whether or not we drive orderly development of our country and truly develop our urban centers and historical communities. We must not surrender any community to ad hoc development. Not Angliston, not Baintown, not any of the communities in Eleuthera, in the Valley, Kemp Road, Treasure Key, North Andros, any of our communities, from Inagua to Grand Bahama and Bimini. Madam Speaker, today's decision must signal our resolve to end the ad hoc, unregulated development of not only our physical but our social environment. The way we structure our communities and integrate and develop our people must be intentional. The new Bahamas we seek to create must be built on shared values, common goals, shared respect for law and order. Our work as a government and as a people towards this end must be executed, Madam Speaker, with urgency. Our humanity and Christian values must guide our approach. Our solemn commitment to protect our country and utilize our resources primarily for the benefit of our citizens and secondarily for others who we welcome in on clearly defined terms must be our foundation. Our energies, Madam Speaker, must be used to build a dynamic and robust economy that fuels prosperity for those that would be industrious, but not only them, Madam Speaker, but also for the most vulnerable who suffer despite their best efforts. Our energies must build a social system that values cohesion, civility, continuous learning, and respect for God, person, and property. Madam Speaker, one of the obstacles to us building the quality nation we desire is our failure to design and execute immigration and migration policies for the modern Bahamas. Madam Speaker, we cannot afford to fail. We must not fail. We must not cave in to any extreme views or voices that feeds hatred and xenophobia and blames every challenge on migrants. Nor must we surrender our borders, crown land, and limited resources to those whose focus is their survival or advancement with little or no concern of the impact of their actions and the impact these actions have on our country, our systems, and our way of life. Madam Speaker, it is universally accepted that migration, when properly managed, ensures or endures and contributes to the benefit of all parties and countries and the global community. I say that immigration must be well managed if it is going to work in the interests of Bahamian communities, our economy, our security, and the future of our children. Illegal immigration has been a perennial challenge for our country, particularly in the last few decades, and it has challenged us to find solutions to balance and control the notion that unless we do something, Bahamians will lose their God-given patrimony in the land of their father and mother's birth. Madam Speaker, it is clear that we must determine the manner in which persons enter our country, and we must set up the parameters within which they operate so that both them, but more importantly, our children and children's children will benefit from our patrimony. And so, Bahamian leaders for the past 50 years or more have all hoped for a day when the Republic of Haiti, our brothers and sisters to the southeast of us, might realize the political and economic stability and security which would provide the conditions necessary for them to remain home and not risk all in unsafe conditions at sea. Madam Speaker, many of us have held these hopes, but nevertheless, many of our brothers and sisters in search of a better life have made their way to or through the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, in his biography entitled Pinling, The Life and Times of Lyndon Oscar Pinling, first Prime Minister of the Bahamas, 1930 to 2000, Sir Lyndon, at page 248, recognized the following relative to illegal migration to the Bahamas. He said, "The worst immigration problem related to illegal immigrants, overwhelmingly from Haiti, but also from Jamaica and other West Indian territories. In this respect, the PLP government was in something of a cleft stick. It needed to restrict an unimaginable flow of unskilled workers from the poor countries, but did not want to be accused of racism against fellow blacks by adopting too harsh a program of repatriation. This dilemma, fortunately mitigated by the very prosperity which drew migrants, was never satisfactorily resolved during the 25 years of the PLP." Prime Minister Hubert Alexander Ingram, in his book, I Say What I Mean and I Mean What I Say, Hubert A. Ingram, in his own words, page 906, says, I especially look forward to the day when countless thousands of Haitians will no longer risk their lives by setting out on unseaworthy vessels, heading for the Bahamas and the United States of America in search of a better life. This desire for Haiti is not, I believe, an F&M or PLP agenda item. This, as with virtually every foreign policy issue, is a Bahamian agenda item, Madam Speaker. The Bahamian agenda item, as faced by Pinling, Ingram, Christie, and Minnis before us, must be treated with the utmost discretion, sensitivity, but certainly, Madam Speaker, urgency. There is no place or space in bringing resolution to this issue for those preaching hatred, xenophobia, vigilantism, or racism. But also, Madam Speaker, there should be very little room for those who will throw up the white flag in surrender and do very little or do much of the same that has not yielded the results our people have long cried and yearned for. As fate would have it, thousands of Haitians have taken this often perilous voyage over the years, and in the process, far too many have perished along the way. With the nearest distance between Haiti and the Bahamas being just 55 nautical miles, the prosperous islands of the Bahamas is the obvious choice for those seeking to escape the abject poverty and inhumane violence of the poorest country, certainly one of them in the Western Hemisphere, where the population, Madam Speaker, is estimated somewhere in the vicinity of 11 million. The temptation and the risk for better is in all of us, and many of our brothers and sisters in Haiti pursues it. And when they do, we are at risk of being, in many ways, overpowered. Moreover, Madam Speaker, the archipelagic makeup of our islands, which spreads more than 100,000 miles of sea, makes it difficult for us to protect our borders and, in so doing, protect the integrity of our country. And Madam Speaker, what is occurring in Haiti, for many observers, they seem not to be able to determine where the end of the collapse is. There is no elected political leaders in place, and more than 100 gangs, some estimate, continue to rule the streets of the country. Madam Speaker, we welcome the decision of the 44th meeting of the heads of government of CARICOM along with Canada to render assistance to Haiti to address the current challenges in partnership with those that presently attempt to govern the country. But Madam Speaker, the primary thing we must do in this place is to protect the interests of Bahamians, those that are here and those that are unborn. And so we simply cannot sit by idly with our fingers crossed in hope that we would find a way. We have to collectively make a way, forge a way. And that requires the collaborative efforts of all stakeholders. Unrest in Haiti must not be allowed to destabilize the Bahamas. We must resolve to do all within our powers with the help of our regional and international partners to mitigate against the crippling impact on our nation and the impact that unchecked migration can have. This notion that illegal migrants openly ignoring the rules and regulations established by legislation is a matter that we must address. But Madam Speaker, to simply put this on migrants is to not face the truth of the matter that many Bahamians participate in the violation of our laws, and any overall policy regime must tackle all dimensions of what contributes to the situation that we find ourselves in. Madam Speaker, unregulated migration from Haiti or anywhere else poses challenges to our security, our healthcare system, our educational system, our social services, our economy, and more. Resultantly, as the temperature on our streets and at our dinner tables throughout the Bahamas rise, we run a very serious risk of coming close to or hitting that tipping point where, Madam Speaker, rhetoric and outrage may result in unintended consequences. So, Madam Speaker, we believe, as members of the opposition, that it is important that the government looks at how all of us can work collaboratively in order to address this crucial issue, which is one of many. We believe that one of the mechanisms that can assist us is the establishment of a select committee, Madam Speaker, that has the authority to examine all of those areas of our national life that intersect with this particular challenge. To leave this debate arguing that each of the organs of government, we simply need to manage them better, I do not believe, Madam Speaker, will do. I do not believe that the public will buy that more of the same is going to produce the results that we need as a country. Madam Speaker, the importance of the Select Committee is to allow our citizens to engage in this discussion, and we should never underestimate that when we hear from this public, what positive results can be yielded. This mechanism of Parliament that increases the participation of our citizens, critiques and improve policies, and help ministries to know better how we might improve their operation in the real world and what needs to change in order to make things better. Madam Speaker, the committee will give citizens an opportunity to express their views based on their firsthand experiences. We would have a chance to carefully examine all of those departments that impact the implementation, not just the implementation, the formulation of immigration and migration policies. Parliamentarians should want to know how the government's policies are working in the real world and want to know what needs to change to make things better. Madam Speaker, when a parliamentary committee starts its inquiries, it should call out for the views and comments from various stakeholders throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We should get the social scientists and those scholars at the College of the Bahamas to be involved, Madam Speaker, so that we can make evidence-based decisions. We should look at the importance of the voices of economists, of non-governmental organizations, of senior government officials, business persons. Madam Speaker, it is important that all stakeholders are involved in this important exercise. Madam Speaker, we know that many Bahamians are outraged at the state of affairs. But outrage, Madam Speaker, isn't what necessarily will produce results. It's what we do in utilizing what in many cases is righteous outrage when people believe that policymakers are engaged in conflicts that do not advance the welfare of the people on the ground. Today, I believe, Madam Speaker, we have a chance. We have a chance to collaborate in this House on this matter that is so important. Our rules for select committees and the calling of witnesses or traveling to various sites, Madam Speaker, is outlined in Rules 21, 22, and 23, the Rules of Procedure, and include a select committee shall be appointed on a motion to investigate, examine, or review bills, or in this case, a very specific matter, moved by a member and authorized by this House, and should reflect, as far as practicable, the political composition of the House. Madam Speaker, the rules all the way through, which will be addressed in greater detail by the member for St. Anne's and other members, gives us the power, Madam Speaker, to call persons, to call ministers, whether it's those persons in the Defense Force, whether it's persons in the Department of Immigration, whether it's those committees, Madam Speaker, that's responsible for examining who enters our borders and whether or not they have left on a timely basis. This select committee, in the full light of day, are able to address a whole range of issues. And so, Madam Speaker, let me mention the list of critical items we believe that this select committee ought to have as terms of reference. One, Madam Speaker, there is a need for us to do a thorough examination of our border security, inclusive of what is the required amount of resources to finish the Sandy Bottom initiative, and where is that allocation coming from in the budget? Secondly, Madam Speaker, what is the complement? What are the number of drones that will be deployed and in which location, Madam Speaker? To what extent are we, and on what timeline, are we beefing up the secondary base in Inagua or additional locations in the southern Bahamas? The second term of reference that this select committee ought to look at is, Madam Speaker, to carry out a complete audit of all current work permit holders and the persons for whom they are employed, to ensure that the persons holding the work permits are working in the location that they are designated to work, and that those persons who have applied on their behalf are in fact living up to all of the obligations. Madam Speaker, we should also scrutinize the entire process of the granting of visas. And Madam Speaker, we have heard for time immemorial that we have a challenge in terms of how visas are processed. There are also concerns having been raised with respect, Madam Speaker, to the granting of permanent residencies and citizenship. Madam Speaker, all of these matters ought to be up for review. Madam Speaker, this select committee should develop the means to address the entire issue surrounding pathways to citizenship in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This select committee gives this government an opportunity, even after the ruling that is being contemplated at the Privy Council. This government ought to engage in a very candid discussion about the various pathways to citizenship in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Madam Speaker, we should seize this opportunity to address this issue and address this issue candidly. The next term of reference, Madam Speaker, is we should have a thorough review of how our administrations, this administration, and in the past, have treated with CARICOM, the OAS, the various organs of the United Nations in addressing the migration dilemma that we face in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. To what extent have we petitioned for assistance with resources to address the vexing problems that we have in terms of settlement of migrants that are here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to assist in the repatriation costs that are affecting the budget of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Madam Speaker, the way in which we interact with all multilateral organizations that address this issue of international migration, we should examine through this select committee as well. Madam Speaker, it is an urgent imperative of this administration to address the irregular communities, the shanty towns that exist. It is important that this select committee look at all that this government has been doing and proposes to do. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has to clarify an important issue relative to what is this government's position on shanty towns. It appears, Madam Speaker, that there are two different narratives at play at the moment, and it is our hope, as we examine this issue, that the government speaks with one voice in terms of its intention. Madam Speaker, now that the restrictions imposed by the injunction has now been lifted, the restrictions have been lifted, the question is, how will we proceed in terms of addressing the shanty towns? We believe that by putting this matter in the full light of day, the government can speak, and we are prepared to offer advice, Madam Speaker. The government can speak clearly on how it intends to proceed. Madam Speaker, there is a need for a housing revolution so that persons can make a transition from shanty towns into homes, whether they are rentals, whether they're being leased, or whether they're being purchased. But the message has to be clear that the government intends to proceed in ensuring that we eliminate the shanty towns. Most Bahamians and persons in the international community clearly recognize that there is no way that we are going to simultaneously break down all of the houses, Madam Speaker, and put people on the road. But what we did not hear in the Prime Minister's comments is there a plan for a housing explosion? Is there a timetable to make this happen? And what about an inventory of all rental units that are available in the Bahamas, so that we do not want to create separate and unequal communities in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? And so the Prime Minister has to send to the public an unambiguous message about what the intention is, because there are two signals that are presently that have presently gone out, both to the local community and the international community, that we are going to move urgently, but wait. And so it's important, Madam Speaker, for this clarification to be presented by the Prime Minister. We are, Madam Speaker, adopting intentionally a conciliatory position with this administration, because we believe working with them on this critical issue is absolutely important. Madam Speaker, in addressing these irregular communities, Madam Speaker, it is important that the government clearly shows the timeline that it intends to move, and it is my hope when the Prime Minister addresses this issue today that he is able to lay out the timeline. Madam Speaker, the next term of reference for this select committee is that there is a need, Madam Speaker, for us to answer a series of questions we have not been able to hear the government answer before. How many illegal migrants are in the Bahamas today? How many shanty towns are there, and what is the composition of the shanty towns? How many Bahamians? What percentage of those persons in the shanty towns are Bahamians? How many of them have status, and how many of them do not have status? Madam Speaker, any decision we make as a government has to answer these and other questions. The problem is, Madam Speaker, many of the questions that people are asking, we have not yet been able to provide answers for. A select committee would allow us to go through the menu of questions that are very important to the Bahamian people and important to our partners, who we are asking for their assistance to work with us as we address this decades-old problem. We need to make policy decisions that are evidence-based. And the only way we're going to make evidence-based decisions, Madam Speaker, is for us to do the necessary studies. One of the reports that I brought today, Madam Speaker, was a report that was overseen by the Honorable Dion Folks when he was in the chair. And we did a survey of shanty towns throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, while that was a step in the right direction so we could have a clear sense of what we were up against, Madam Speaker, there are additional studies that are necessary to allow us to put in place policies that will get results, not policies that would have unintended bad consequences. And so, Madam Speaker, policymakers, in my view, have to be careful that we are not making policies simply because we are under duress. But we should know that the policies we put in place will achieve the result that we have in mind. And so, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to make evidence-based decisions, and in order to do so, we must conduct the necessary studies. I do believe I have an hour, Madam Speaker, for the resolution. Yes? Okay, good. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is important for us to establish a confidential intelligence unit with the objective of gathering more timely information on migrant movements. Madam Speaker, we must address the issue of corruption in the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, we put in place, and I'll come to that in just a moment, we attempted when we were in government, under the leadership of the Honorable Ellsworth Johnson and Brent Simonet, to put in place a cashless system in the Department of Immigration. We were encouraged to hear that the government is doing everything possible to make sure that we collect the required resources that others have collected on our behalf. And so, Madam Speaker, we have to address the issue of corruption among different gatekeepers, Madam Speaker. And so it is important that this select committee examine the role that employers, Bahamians and expatriate alike, play in terms of, Madam Speaker, applying for permits on behalf of persons, but not following the guidelines required to ensure that they work in the particular positions they have agreed to, and that they also honor the agreement that they make as employers. Madam Speaker, if an employee, a migrant, is living in substandard housing conditions, that is in large measure a reflection on those that encourage them to come to the country or who hired them while they were here as an irregular or undocumented migrant. And so, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to address the issue of corruption. We must make sure, Madam Speaker, that we utilize the mystery shopping that is in place now in the ministry, where one is able to test the system to see if the wheels of this system only move by grease. We should, Madam Speaker, continue to ensure that we test the system to make sure, from the minister to the person who is receiving the application, that there is no illegal or unethical behavior that is being manifested. A select committee, in our view, can assist us in this regard, and we ask members opposite to resist the temptation to tell the Bahamian people that we are going to do what we're doing, when the reality, Madam Speaker, is the public is absolutely clear that if we do more of the same, we're going to get the kinds of results that we have gotten for the last 50 years. Madam Speaker, we also ought to aggressively enforce the immigration law, but to do so with humanity. Madam Speaker, I listened with great interest to the numbers that were given by the Prime Minister and earlier by the member for Carmichael, relative to how many persons were interdicted and repatriated. Madam Speaker, one of the things, unfortunately, was not indicated, Madam Speaker, is how many persons have entered the country to the best of their knowledge. Madam Speaker, I heard that one boat, one vessel, over the last, I believe it was what, a year or so, that may have entered the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, I may have misheard, because because it could not be possible that only one vessel in the last few months would have come to the Bahamas, or in the last year. Madam Speaker, it is important that we examine our surveillance system. and we examine the relationship between the neighboring countries and the agreements that we presently have to determine if those agreements, Madam Speaker, is yielding the results that the Bahamian people need in terms of border surveillance. And Madam Speaker, many persons are coming to our shores not by boat, but they're coming by plane, and they are overstaying their time. So in many countries, the inordinate number of migrants that are in a country, or irregular migrants, they are here not because they came on a boat, but they came legitimately through the airport, and they overstayed, and we have not as a country been diligent enough to track them and to apprehend them. And so, Madam Speaker, Select Committee can help us, Madam Speaker, address this issue. How do we tighten up this system? And it is my hope that the minister would be able to speak to whether or not they have numbers on how many persons come into the country by air and overstay their time, and what is the comparison between those numbers and the number of persons that come by vessel. Madam Speaker, the immediate focus should be, one of the immediate focus of this Select Committee should be to look at the nexus or the correlation or relationship between illegal migration and human trafficking, gun trafficking, Madam Speaker, and drug trafficking. Those of us who are familiar with some of the things that happen on the streets in the Bahamas clearly know that some of our brothers and sisters, some of the countries from the South, are the conduit through which people, drugs, and guns make it into the Bahamas. And so the Select Committee should look transparently at those pathways that people, guns, and drugs enter into the country. Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should also look at how we can rebuild trust among Bahamians and migrants in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, a lot of Bahamians are disillusioned with what they have seen over the last few decades by successive administrations as it relates to this issue. I believe the government would make a huge mistake in believing that we can do brief national addresses with a limited amount of meat on the bone, and that Bahamians are going to accept and have confidence that we are going to change the plight of our people. Madam Speaker, I believe that it is critical that this Select Committee also look at how can the government, the ruling party, the opposition, work in tandem to restore the hope in Bahamian people that we have their back, that we intend to act in their interests, that we are willing to listen to them so that we can pivot in a different direction, since some of the things that we have been doing have not worked in their best interest. And Madam Speaker, if we doubt it, we only need to look at the absence of land reform. There are Bahamians who have been fighting for years to get agriculture land. In New Providence, many people just want a half an acre, 2 acres, 3 acres to farm. Or they want crown grants for entrepreneurial initiatives. But Madam Speaker, they have a problem gaining access to a half an acre, a quarter acre. But they see people who come from another country are sitting on 5 acres and 10 acres. They know Bahamians and non-Bahamians who are mining acres of land in New Providence and elsewhere with impunity. So, Madam Speaker, having served as the Minister of Agriculture, there are many persons on agriculture land that Bahamians and those who we give permission to can be given access for farming purposes. And so, Madam Speaker, one of the things that when I was the Minister of Agriculture that we did is we followed the law by getting an opinion from the Attorney General's office. We worked with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of National Security, and the Attorney General's office. We held a town meeting, which was required. We posted notices as was required because there was contamination of the water table in North Andros, inclusive of finding fecal matter in the water. All the documents are available on file. And persons immediately responded, asking for an extension while they seek to move, asking for an attempt to purchase land, but persons responded. We did it, Madam Speaker, quietly. We didn't want it to become a show, a performance. We wanted to follow the law and return the land to the rightful owners. And so to the question from West End and Bimini, Madam Speaker, that is one example of the steps we took to ensure that persons occupying Crown land, agricultural land, would no longer occupy it since they did not have the right to do so. And so, Madam Speaker, if we attempt to do business as usual, the Bahamian people are likely, Madam Speaker, to continue to demonstrate outrage. We have an opportunity to rebuild trust among the Bahamian people, and also, Madam Speaker, to rebuild trust among persons who are born in other countries who are here. Because let us be real, a number of persons who are here, even with status, have in fact been brutalized in the Bahamas. We have any number of court rulings to show that we have lost that battle with a number of persons. And so we have to build trust also with migrant communities, Madam Speaker. And so it is important, Madam Speaker, that one of the terms of reference for this committee is to rebuild trust among Bahamians and migrant community. Madam Speaker, it's important that the Select Committee also travel throughout the Bahamas, Madam Speaker, to see all of these communities that presently exist and to hear from the government in terms of what is the specific plan, what is the plan for Abaco, what is the specific plan with respect. I listened attentively to the housing vision of the minister. And Madam Speaker, it is important to ramp up the production of homes. There's always been a scarcity, but there's a great scarcity for Bahamians, but there will be a greater scarcity, Madam Speaker, as we seek to make sure that these unregulated communities do not proliferate in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Madam Speaker, one of the reasons we need to have an open-air discussion is because Bahamians, they listen to us, and one of the things that people are fed up about is we talk about this legal impediment that we face in terms of stopping the growth of shanty towns. Well, the truth of the matter is nothing prevented us from stopping new construction even when the injunction was in place. So for example, the government has been in for over 15 months. Buildings were still being constructed. And so, Madam Speaker, it's one thing to have a court order that prevented you from breaking down existing homes. What prevented us from stopping new homes, new illegal homes from being built? And Madam Speaker, again, this is not confined to the PLP. It happened under both administrations. And so, Madam Speaker, we have to demonstrate that we have the will to address this issue. Madam Speaker, Haiti is embroiled in a civil war. So, Madam Speaker, one of the things that we believe is absolutely important is that in our conversations as the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Immigration, as they travel internationally, one of the items, I believe, Madam Speaker, that should be on their agenda is to not only have a sober conversation, Madam Speaker, with the multilateral organizations, but they should also be talking unilaterally to those countries that have contributed to the dilemma in Haiti. We've talked in this House, and there are several members on that side that are committed to reparations, Madam Speaker. Well, France should be involved in providing reparations to Haiti in a substantial way. And we would join the government in lending our voice to the role that those colonizers played in trampling upon the rights of the Haitian people, extracting resources, and in many ways, Madam Speaker, putting them in a very difficult position in the international community. And those countries that collaborated with France, including our neighbor to the north, Madam Speaker, who we ought to approach about a greater role that the United States can play. not only in remedying situations in Haiti, working in tandem with the United Nations and the Bahamian and CARICOM, but also what role they might play in the Bahamas, since we have a shared challenge, since migrants are either moving to the Bahamas or through the Bahamas. And so Madam Speaker, it is important that these are matters that are put on the front burner, that the Minister with responsibility for immigration, the Minister with responsibility for foreign affairs, and of course the Prime Minister, that they address these issues with various multilateral organizations and countries that can be of benefit to the Bahamas fight to ensure that we, Madam Speaker, address what is a crisis for us. Madam Speaker, we are aware that there are members of the United Nations, different organizations in the United Nations, that help with settlements, the construction of homes. It is my hope that the Prime Minister has already begun discussions about how we might benefit, Madam Speaker, from assistance in that regard, and that the Minister, as Minister of Finance, as we explode a housing revolution, that we look at how we might access preferential rates on loans, given the fact that we are not only vulnerable due to climate change, but we're also vulnerable based on our geographical location and the ways in which the migrant populations from the south can potentially negatively affect our condition here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should also look at the fisheries bill. It is our understanding, Madam Speaker, that there is great concern among fishers in terms of the potential damage that can be done to their way of life because of unsafe practices by migrants who come from other jurisdictions. And so, Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should look carefully at the fisheries bill, the concerns expressed by Bahamian fishers throughout the Bahamas, with a view of determining whether or not, Madam Speaker, that the criticisms that they offer merit urgent intervention by this administration to ensure that the fishing practices developed in other jurisdictions do not negatively impact the life of our marine resources, in particular the coral reefs, in particular the conch stock, in particular the lobster stock in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the other term of reference for this Select Committee to engage in an assessment and acceptance of the reality, Madam Speaker, that what we are facing in terms of immigration, much like climate change, is an existential threat to our development. Madam Speaker, we would like for the Prime Minister, as he travels internationally, to again draw greater attention to this issue as well in terms of the challenges that we face due to immigration, illegal immigration, and irregular migration. Madam Speaker, the final point I wish to raise, Madam Speaker, is one, Madam Speaker, that I believe we've talked about a great deal, but we have not seen sufficient action in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, it's important for us to appreciate that we have gaps in our workforce. And so this particular Select Committee should be engaged in a manpower, a woman power audit to determine what gaps exist in our labor market that we must fill from outside at the white-collar level and at the blue-collar level. This should be a sober discussion, Madam Speaker. We shouldn't run from it simply because we have a serious crisis in the country relative to irregular migration. We should control migration. We should organize systems to ensure that in much the same way the migrants who come in benefit, that the Bahamas benefits, Madam Speaker. And so, therefore, it is our recommendation that this Select Committee would address the issue, Madam Speaker, of a human power audit to determine where there are gaps in our workforce, what skill sets are missing, which countries near and far do we look at in order to attract those kinds of skill set who will come in and work within the parameters we set out as a country. And in anyone coming to join our workforce, that they do not in any way displace the primacy of Bahamian workers. Not all of the skill sets that we desire are resident in the Bahamas. So as we build the capacity of Bahamians, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to also utilize skill sets that come from other countries. Whether from the South or whether from the North, we should be open. However, Madam Speaker, this is a matter that we should litigate in the full light of day, because our previous efforts to do so, again, have been met with great cynicism and skepticism by the Bahamian people. Many of our citizens still believe that some policymakers have just thrown up the white flag. And so if you're in financial services, there are some of our people who believe that a lot of the jobs are reserved for others from distant lands in the North, and the relationship manager job, which Bahamians are well able to carry out, often the insufficient Bahamians are given opportunities in those positions. And similarly, at the blue-collar level, there's a view that somehow migrants coming in are undercutting the prices that Bahamians would ordinarily make, when the truth is, in some of those occupations, we don't know for a fact if we have adequate Bahamians working in those places. Well, a select committee will allow us, Madam Speaker, to look at this issue dispassionately and arrive at a less of an emotive but a sensible decision on what we ought to do in terms of strengthening our workforce. And so, Madam Speaker, I close by once again encouraging us to form a select committee that would look at the digitization program at the ministry with responsibility for immigration to make sure that the system is consistently working, that the software and the system is consistently working, that persons are not circumventing the system in order for their own personal purposes, that we make sure the intelligence unit that addresses the issue of corruption anywhere in the system, not just in the Department of Immigration, but in any of our uniform branches or anywhere elsewhere, that we address that issue as well, Madam Speaker. And so I close by appealing to this administration to join us in establishing this select committee that we believe would have a positive impact on addressing the migration and the illegal immigration issue in the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, Dr. Dawn Marshall, seminal work on the subject entitled The Haitian Problem, Illegal Migration to the Bahamas, underscores the current disposition of Haiti and the growing concerns of Bahamians, and provides an excellent opportunity for public focus and discourse on all matters related to this crisis. For this reason, Madam Speaker, my colleagues and I are prayerful that this Parliament would move with a greater sense of urgency, that we would work outside of our comfort zone, that we would shed any spirit of arrogance that tells us that what we're doing is sufficient, and that it will result in improving the plight of Bahamians, in protecting our patrimony, while at the same time behaving in a humane way with those that have fled their country looking for a better way. And it's against this backdrop I call for the establishment, Madam Speaker, of a select committee to deal with the issue of illegal immigration and migration.